ELI5 Why is card counting in blackjack possible? And isn't it super easy to stop just by mixing other cards in? When it comes to questions about gambling, it's always good to keep in mind that the player has to know there's a way chance to win. If there wasn't, then they wouldn't play. Casino needs to come out on top across thousands of players, but it doesn't have to come out on top at the individual level, and this is what drives players to their tables. So sure, they could put in preventative measures, but would it be worth it? If less people play and the house wins more often, would that be worth more than lots of people playing and the house coming out on top? The more decks you use, the less hands per minute you can have played. So casinos are balancing two things: how easy it would be to count, and how many hands per minute they can get. Any deviation to reduce counting would slow the game down, so they're estimating the amount they would lose by card counting versus slowing down and choosing the one that makes them more money. Online casinos are impossible to count in, because each person needs time to place their bets, so they can just use all the measures to make it difficult to count. Yes, and that's indeed what they do. They either cut the shoe so short that they shuffle before you can be reasonably sure the shoe is advantageous. Or they also have new continuous card shufflers JPG quality 70 that will always shuffle the first deck or so back into the shoe, making card counting largely pointless. Shuffling the deck slows down the pace of the game, reducing the number of bets placed resolved per length of time. The casino has to make the decision to trade off between higher pace, or risking that an advantaged player might be able to take advantage of a few hands in their favor every once in a while. Continuous shuffling machines also exist, but are a huge upfront expense, and some gamblers are oddly superstitious about cards being stored out of sight. To answer your question, if the house shuffled the cards every hand, card counting would not be possible. Why don't they do this? Well, I guess for one, it would take too long. Blackjack hands go by fast. I imagine the money they profit by running more rounds offsets the tiny amount they lose to card counters. But mainly, because those are the rules. If you shuffled every time, it wouldn't be blackjack. Yes. Casinos do exactly that. It makes card counting much less profitable, but to make it unprofitable they would have to shuffle after each hand, which would make for an extremely boring game. Usually they use 6-8 decks and shuffle after 75 of the shoes dealt. It's a good enough trade-off because card counting is very obvious and they can just ban you from playing when they spot what you are doing. You can detect card counters by observing the way they bet. It's not easy and it requires experience, but it's doable. At that point you'd politely tell the person to bend, let them take their winnings, and kick them out. Adding cards into the deck would be changing the odds, which would probably be illegal, and if the word ever got out, nobody would come to your establishment whatsoever. Among the many good answers, it should also be noted that it's really obvious when someone is card counting effectively. Basically they have to sit through a long series of hands betting chump change, then when the count is good start maxing out your wagers. The casino will almost certainly notice before you make any real money and start using countermeasures, or just ask you to stop playing, because the ratio of 10 cards to non-10 cards is known. Adding more decks helps the house because a given hand will not change the ratio of a 6-deck shoe much, but the theory is the same. If there have been less than 5, 8, 10 cards dealt, then the deck is heavy and I have a greater likelihood of being dealt a 10 card. If the shoe gets heavy enough, it's a good time to raise my bet. I'm not really a gambling man, so I don't understand any of this, but I'm glad to hear that there is actually a way to beat the house. Gambling sucks. There's a reason why these companies earn so much money. It's because the odds are so heavily stacked in their favor. They prey on the vulnerable and ruin people's lives. Big up the card counters. Former professional gambler here. The reason card counting is theoretically possible, is because shuffling after every hand is a countermeasure. It costs the casino money on average. The players aren't betting while the dealer is shuffling. It's easier to deal more hands before the shuffle, and just bounce the players you find undesirable. As a former dealer, the amount of decks isn't the issue. The automatic snail shufflers are. Each card has a value. Depending on the total value, you adjust your wager accordingly. When you don't know how many decks are remaining, you can't keep an accurate count. That's why most card counters target smaller casinos with manual shuffling. Casino games in most countries are regulated by a law. Blackjack is played with a standard deck of 52 cards. If you change the composition of the deck, you change the game. It can no longer legally be called blackjack in most places. An example of this is Spanish 21, which is similar to blackjack but played with a modified deck. It's extremely easy to stop card counting. Just limit their bets and they can't make a profit. Card counting relies on being able to max bet when the count gets high. There is a whole betting system related to what the count is and what the player's risk tolerance is. So if you just limit bet then they can do it. The ratio of high cards to low cards remains the same. They can only add a new dex to the mix which just doubles the total cards but keeps the statistics of card counting the same. Doesn't matter how many decks are in the mix, card counting will always work statistically. It's possible because if you know all the 7s are gone and you have 14, you know it's not possible to hit 21 on your next draw? Do it with all the other numbers now. They can't mix random cards in because it's still supposed to have a set chance to draw the card. To answer your question, yes, it's easy to stop by mixing other cards in. That's also why you can't count in online blackjack. It typically uses an infinite deck. The reason casinos don't is mainly tradition and the impracticality of shuffling too often. You cannot profit from counting cards. The rules, countermeasures and human error prevent it. The first book came out in 1960 and the casinos have aggressively defended since. It's not a Hollywood movie, so waste your time and money fantasizing if you must. I remember watching something about this. It claimed that all the obvious ways to make card counting a waste of time have been tried. But the upshot was that less people played blackjack. The casinos need the illusion that you have an advantage. The house can use multiple decks of cards, and can reshuffle the used cards back in. But they can't just add a bunch of extra 2s and 3s in. That would make it really unlikely that anybody would win at all, so nobody would play ELI5 no matter what deck you make. It would favor both house and players equally. For example, more or lower cards would help players get busted less. BTW card counting is dead after introduction of continuous shuffle machines. In the UK at least, most casinos now employ automatic shuffling machines which makes card counting impossible. The used cards from each hand are fed back into the machine where the decks are constantly being shuffled. Adding cards would change the game, and make the odds different. For example, if they chose to add more aces or 2s into the game, it would totally change the odds. And I'm sure there are regulations against this. It's really not possible. It's just that casinos don't appreciate you even trying to take advantage of them, so they put a stop to it. Doesn't matter if it's possible, it's just bad form. Instead of mixing extra cards in, which is illegal, they remove unseen cards from play, e.g. burn a few cards every hand so you can't count that. Achieves somewhat same effect. Dumb blackjack question I will ask to you: better okay strategy to just stay at almost any number above like 11 or so since the dealer is required to hit? I don't even understand what card counting is supposed to mean. Shouldn't it be part of the game? If you get 3 2s in a row, you know there's max 1 left. Gamble exists because we think we can beat the system. If they remove the beat the system part from equation, casino and lottery will all gone. It is not really possible in most casinos because they use 5 or 6 decks and reshuffle all of them together at least halfway through them. Think of it as not actually counting the cards but more or less counting the probability of getting either a high or low card. Why they don't shuffle more often is what I don't understand. They already do it when the suspect counting.